appears on the left-hand side. Today we are going to be thinking about inflation. We introduced inflation a little while back, just before your examinationing. We had a bit of a discussion about what inflation might be. But today, one of the things I'd like to do, there's a skill about applying your knowledge. And so we're going to be thinking about how governments calculate inflation, how they use inflation, what that's all about, and possible problems with doing that. Just as we have with unemployment, we're going to be thinking about the same sorts of things with inflation. So you can kind of see a bit of a pattern as to how we're going to be explaining these sorts of ideas. So this is about measuring inflation. Now, we've said unemployment is an evil. All right, that's what we said. It was so bad, all the economic costs and all the social costs, etc., of unemployment was considered to be evil. Well, I didn't quite give you the full quote to that, but the full quote talked about twin evils or two evils of economics, one of which was unemployment. Anybody like to hazard a guess as to what the other evil in economics was mentioned? What do we think? Inflation. Well done. Yes, exactly right. So for similar reasons, we are going to discover inflation is going to be discussed as being an evil, something we need to get rid of. And obviously one of our key macroeconomic objectives is low and stable prices, thereby tackling this idea of inflation. The image that you see there is going to come back again. It's a good image. I quite like it. Okay. Now there's a video there which we don't have to watch because we're going to go through it, called What is Inflation? That's in the slides. So we're just going to go past that. Right, so some quick definitions to understand. The first one, the price level. All right. Now we're familiar with this because of our work on aggregate demand and aggregate supply. Our price level understanding talks about the average of current prices in this particular context, because you're talking about the overall prices, the price level for everything in your entire economy. When we talk about inflation, what we're going to be referring to is a sustained, note the word sustained, increase in the general price level. Right? So sustained, obviously ongoing, is what the word sustained means. We can talk also about something called deflation. So as we've talked about inflation being a sustained increase in the general price level, deflation is the reverse. It's going to be a sustained decrease in the general price level. So inflating the balloon, deflating the balloon. And then we've got this other one, disinflation. And we hinted at this a little while ago now, that you could have a decrease in the inflation rate. So this disinflation idea is about the rate of change of the price levels. So we suggest that inflation is still occurring, it's just it's happening at a slower rate. All right, so inflation at a slower rate is the idea of disinflation. Now, you can see quite clearly that there is going to be a, well, shall we say, a everyday mistake that a lot of new players, young players have, which is the idea of confusing deflation and disinflation. All right. So examiners love to test you on the difference between these two. They have in the past. Who knows with the new syllabus whether that will still continue. But in the past, definitely, they have loved to test you on the difference between those two. The rate of inflation is the term that we use to describe inflation, essentially just the rate of change, so the speed at which inflation is occurring. But we're going to use rate of inflation interchangeably with the idea of inflation. Right, those were our definitions. So you can probably guess what I'm going to ask you to do now. I'm going to ask you to explain the difference between inflation, deflation, and disinflation. There you go. Difference between inflation, deflation, and disinflation is what we're after. Good work, Ensign. Yeah, good work. Yeah, okay. Mm-hmm. Good work, Anne. Good work, Joel. Good work, Andrew. All right, okay. Kendrick, we got an answer, Kendrick? Sariha, have a go. Wait a couple more seconds. Just going to stop sharing just for a minute. Okay. Good. All right. Let's go back to the screen. All right. Now, generally speaking, we did really well with that. All right. One of the key aspects that we need to make sure that we are getting right is this idea that inflation is a sustained increase in the general price level. Absolutely. And deflation is the sustained decrease in the general price level. Disinflation is the decrease in the inflation rate, right? So it's about the rate of change. Yes, you're right there, Jensen. It is the same thing as inflation, but at a slower rate. So if you, what if I open a whiteboard? Cheers, 2 student screens. All right. Can you see the whiteboard?
Yes.
All right, fantastic. Okay, so if I do a drawing here very quickly, apologies for my drawing. Yeah. All right. Okay, I'm going to edit that. Okay. So if the numbers up here are positive and the numbers down here are negative, all right. So we've got inflation rate here. Then inflation is here, inflation is here, inflation is here, but it's at a slower rate. And it becomes deflation when it goes through this zero line here. And that bit is deflation. All right, so deflation. Right. Because it has officially become, if you like, negative inflation. And this bit here is disinflation. So there's still positive inflation, it's just at a decreasing rate. All right, so that bit there is disinflation, this bit here is deflation. All right. Now that's quite a technical thing to understand, but I think we've done really well with that. All right. I think I just closed that now. Just in case it doesn't save, close. All right. Now, next bit. We talked a little bit about this before, but we're going to talk about it again. In this particular context, we talked about nominal versus real with regards to GDP. Now we're talking about nominal prices just by themselves. All right. So current unadjusted prices. So they're just the prices. They're the everyday prices that we see, the prices that are displayed in the store. Real prices, as we discussed one other day, are going to be prices adjusted for inflation. It is useful, obviously, to figure out if things become easier or harder to buy over time. So the concept there is purchasing power. All right? That's the ease at which we're able to buy something over time, is your purchasing power. So the example that we've got here is if a kilo of sugar cost $1 in 1 year and $1.05 in the next year, and inflation rate is 10% during that period, the nominal price has actually gone up by 5%, but the real price of sugar has actually decreased. All right? Because inflation has increased by more than the adjusted price. Then, the idea of purchasing power is the ability that you have, the amount of goods and services that you're able to buy with your money. Inflation robs you of purchasing power. The only way to solve that is if your income was to increase by as much as the inflation rate, at least as much, if not more. It will be positively affected by deflation, but other things will be negatively affected, right? Unless your income decreases by more than the rate of deflation. So that's a possibility as well. So deflation and inflation, they're the opposite. So they're going to have opposite effects, but you do need to be careful about what's happening to, say, your income at the same time. Right? So it is not a hard and fast rule. We say real prices have been adjusted by inflation. We're able to work out the purchasing power, but your purchasing power is also linked to the actual income level that you have. So if your income level is increasing as inflation is increasing, then there's a chance, if it's increasing at the same rate as inflation, then you're keeping up with inflation. So your purchasing power is stayed the same. But if your income has increased by more than inflation, then your purchasing power has increased. And if your income is increased by less than inflation, then your purchasing power has decreased. When you're thinking about deflation, that was your sustained decrease in prices. So there, if your income is increasing, then there's a strong chance that you're actually gaining purchasing power. However, if your income is decreasing, it could still be beneficial to you purchasing power-wise, dependent on the rate at which it is decreasing. So if your income is decreasing, but it's decreasing by more than the rate of deflation, then you are going to be negatively affected with regards to purchasing power. Right, so a little bit complicated, but not too bad. What was purchasing power all about? What is it? Just give a good definition, understanding of what purchasing power is. What was purchasing power all about? Good. Now, goods and services you can get, yes. Well done, around. Ooh, I like that, Andrew. That's very well explained. Yes, that's good. Thank you, Darwin. Sounds a little bit Dr. Googly, but it's good. Yes, well done, Joel. Yeah, work went how? Wait, no, a couple others. Yeah, work. Yeah, that's very succinct. Yeah, yes, okay. It doesn't have to be one unit of money. It can just be in general. You can generalize it a bit there, say on, you know, it's the amount of goods or services that you can buy with your money. Right. Come on, Kendrick, have a go. Okay, all right, well done, team. Now, purchasing power, as we're going to see, is going to be a bit of a theme with inflation. Because it is affected by inflation, when we start talking about the effects of inflation, purchasing power is going to be a big one, all right? And because inflation is one of those, like when we had market failures, where the more we consumed, the bigger the market failure problem became, potentially. Well, it's the same with the purchasing power. The higher, faster the rate of inflation, the bigger the impact on your purchasing power is going to become, right? And obviously vice versa for deflation. So when you get rates of inflation that are increasing on a rapid level, then that purchasing power effect is going to be pretty drastic. And there's a case study that we can look at about what's called the Weimar Republic. So if any of you are students of history at all, or if you've taken a history class, you might know something about the Weimar Republic. But the Weimar Republic had an issue with inflation, quite a significant issue with inflation. And it has become quite a textbook case study for what happens when inflation gets out of control. There are more modern examples. Venezuela is a classic example where inflation has got out of control. Right? And one of the favorite things I have is a little video that I like to show learners where the European Central Bank produced this video talking about inflation being like a monster. And so they have the inflation monster, and then they have the deflation monster as the counter. So the more or the faster the inflation rate is, the bigger the effect on purchasing power. But we also need to temper that with an understanding that different people, because of the income distribution, they're going to have different purchasing power effects, right? It's going to affect different people in different ways because different people have different income levels, right? Some people are much more able to change their income as well, right? Able to increase their rate of income. Other people just can't change their income. It's got no choice in the matter. So those effects of inflation are going to vary depending on who we're talking about. Right, so reminding ourselves, the balloon metaphor that I mentioned before, inflation, we're causing it to increase or to expand, and deflation, we're causing it to reduce, the price level, that is. So we think about the price level as being inflated or deflated. Now, here's a graph that, yes, you should be able to see. This has the USA, and here's what I like you to do. This is just data interpretation, which you're all very good at. What years in America, yes, it does finish at 2010, so you could have a think about years after that and what's happened, had the highest rates of inflation, and which years actually had deflation. And is there any trend in recent decades? So whilst you've got that on, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to go back to the meet. And in is the x-axis time. Yes. Let's see. Which one's x? Right. You've got time here. This is years. Okay. So 19, 20, 30, 40, 50, and so on. And then this is your inflation rate there. All right. Oh, for the graph I drew. Percentage change over, yeah, it'll be time. Yes, it will. Right, so just in the meet, in the chat, all right, which years had the highest rates of inflation? Which years had deflation? And how would you describe the trend? Now, they're using the word recent, okay? So you're talking recent decades, you're talking like the 2000s to 2010s. I know we're a whole decade over that, but because this is the information we have, that's what you'll talk about. So what's been happening here? Right. I know it's maybe not easy to see on the screen, but have a go. Right? What year or years had the highest levels of inflation? What years had deflation? And how would you describe the trend over time? Right? Data interpretation or analysis. Just in the chat function. Just type your answers into the chat function. Good answers coming in already. Good. Okay, some others, what do you think? Okay. Okay, good. Yeah. What do the rest of you think? Good work, Anne. Any other thoughts, anyone? Good work, Wenhao. Yes, you're right with that one, and that might tell you something, mightn't it? What might that tell you? Okay. Well done. Right, so we jump back and have another look at that graph and see what we can see. Good point. All right. So, yes, you were all absolutely right. If you're looking at the 1920s, we're seeing some pretty staggering levels of inflation. And then we're seeing a bit of a drop-off here with deflation occurring, and particularly in the 1930s, the early 1930s. Now, if you take just that window of time, right, 1920s into the 1930s, we've discussed this previously. There was, historical context. What was happening in the USA in the 1920s? Do we remember? Maybe I should go back to the meat. What was happening in the 1920s? Not in the 1920s, it wasn't. It was before the Great Depression. Oil shocks? Oh, no, that's a bit later. Well, yes, World War I was before the 1920s. Yes, World War I finished in 1918. I'm glad the historical knowledge is there. Right? And immediately after the end of World War I, pretty much all around the world, but especially in the US, something amazing happened. It wasn't a recession. It was pretty much the opposite to a recession. Yes, there were. Yes, you're absolutely you're absolutely right. Yeah, there were. All right. So, students of history, you might know the 1920s by its nickname. The nickname for the 1920s is called the Roaring Twenties. Okay. So immediately after World War I, the inventiveness, the creativity of the world just took off, and there was an awful lot of government spending to rebuild after the First World War. There were, you're absolutely right, a lot of babies after the First World War, there were, right? So the 1920s just exploded, all right? And when I say exploded, I don't mean it like boom, right? I'm saying exploded like a massive increase in aggregate demand. Right, really, really big demand-driven growth. So if we do then have a look again at that graph, That's the period where you've got massive levels of inflation. You've got huge levels of economic growth during that 1920s, and you've got big levels of inflation occurring. All right? Up until a certain point. Now, a number of you mentioned this before, the Great Depression. Well, the Great Depression was caused partly by the Great Crash, right? The big crash on the stock market, and that occurred in the 1920s. It occurred in 1928, right? Kind of spilled the Great Depression into the late 1920s, 1929, into the 1930s. And the Great Depression lasted for years, right? So when we look at that data, if you imagine a stock market crashing, all of a sudden the price of assets starts to fall, and you've got, a number of years where you've got a deflationary effect on the economy, right? And one of the reasons why we had a big depression in America is because one of the reasons why this was occurring was that demand had collapsed. The price level essentially had fallen, but even though purchasing power had improved, right, and particularly here, people didn't have jobs, they didn't have money, so they couldn't go out and buy things, right? So then you had further decreases in demand, right? And it became a bit of a deflationary spiral, right? Now, the government could have saved the world with regards to this, and they could have spent a whole lot of money, right, and actually got themselves out of this, but they didn't. They decided to cut government spending at this time, thereby reducing aggregate demand. And so the effect was worse. It made the whole depression last years longer than it probably should have. And if you look then, what do we got here? 1939, right, was when America joined the Second World War, or when the Second World War started. And then you've got 1940s is when America actually started participating in the Second World War. And what happened to demand with regards to the Second World War? All of a sudden, everybody wanted the technology that America was able to provide. America started producing guns and bombs and tanks and planes and all of those sorts of things. Then you've got the same phenomenon happening. End of the Second World War, 1945, and big boom in the economy, right? And it lasted quite some time. Then you've got the early 1950s, a bit of a depression, so a bit of a deflationary effect there. And you've got another big soar in demand. So from there, you see deflation becoming much less significant. And as you correctly pointed out, a large number of you, from then on, no deflation at all in these decades, none. Yes, you had periods of inflation and disinflation, but no actual deflation, not for any of these time periods at all. Right, that's decade lengths, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. All right, remember 1987, you had the stock market crash. Well, there's your decline in demand impacting prices. All right. Okay, 2000s, you had the stock market bubble crash. A little bit of a decline, right? A little bit of a disinflation. And then now, obviously, we're up here in the 20s, right? And we're seeing some different things occurring. So can we say deflation is no longer a problem? Because it certainly hasn't appeared in the last few decades. Right? Is inflation still a problem for the United States? Because this, you look at this, you're talking 10, 20, what about 30 odd years, and it's all under 5%, which is what somebody mentioned as well. So if it's under 5%, that doesn't appear to be a problem. I mean, you've got inflation rates here that are 15%, up to, that's nearly 20%. That one's up to close to 25%. All right, now, inflation and the price level. So a little bit mathematical, right? As an understanding, we need to know that a change in inflation does not mean a change in the price level, all right? Inflation is the change in the price level, but the change in inflation is not necessarily, okay? So if you've got changes in the price level, there they are, right? Price level has gone up, but the inflation rate has actually gone down, right? So there's still an increase in prices, but you've got disinflation occurring. And again, I'm pushing this point just a little bit because, again, it's an area where learners get confused and they can make quite small errors, calculation-based in particular, and analysis of the data. Right? They might look at that and say it's deflation. You know? No, it's not. It's disinflation. And, you know, you lose a couple of marks in your paper 2 with regards to that. So we need to make sure we're aware of that. Now, there is another video in the slides which we will show you. Might just link the videos, I think. Right. So how do we actually measure inflation? Well, it's complicated in a way, but also straightforward in another way. We use what's called a consumer price index. Code for it is CPI, Consumer Price Index. And what we're going to do is we're going to grab a basket of goods and services. That's why this image I told you was going to come back, right? So trolley, basket, whatever you sort of imagine when you're going shopping, but it's goods and services, and you collect those. They're averaged, right? So we're going to work out the cost of living for the average person's consumption. Now, you can already see that there are going to be problems with that. Because who is average? Well, none of us is average, all right? So there's going to be products in the basket that you don't buy. There's going to be products in the basket that you buy but somebody else doesn't buy. There's going to be products in the basket that, well, there will be duplicates potentially that have to be in the basket as duplicates because on average, half the people buy this one and the other half buy the other one. So they have to have them both in there. Particularly that's the case with services. Or services, you might not access these particular services, other people might, but they both have to be in there, right? So that's the idea behind, well, you're starting to see why the basket, right, of goods and services is going to be a bit of a problem. So what we're then doing is we're taking that basket and we are going to measure the increase, the percentage increase in the price of the basket as a whole. So we're going to need to add together all of the goods and services prices, and we're going to work them out as a percentage. Yes, you can see the maths. And then we're going to compare that percentage over time. And trust me when I tell you this, government statisticians do this, all right? They actually do the calculations, work out the percentages, and then they have to report. In New Zealand, it's done quarterly, so that's quite often, all right? Other parts of the world, I would assume it's done quite a bit. I used to, in the supermarket, on occasion, would see a government statistician walking around recording prices of things, which I always used to find quite interesting. Now, some goods in the basket will have actually increased in price. Others will actually have decreased. So the price, it is the price of the entire basket that we're actually going to study, right? So you're almost looking at an average, okay, in a way. You're going to weight it. I mean, we're going to talk about that in a minute. But if we have a look at these this is from the US, so apologies. But these are things in the basket, all right? So hospital services, college textbooks, college tuitions, childcare, medical services, wages, housing, food, beverages, new cars, household furnishings, clothing, cell phone service, software, toys, TVs. There's obviously more, right, within the basket itself. And the red, all right, indicates these products within the basket have increased in price, and the blue suggests these products have actually decreased in price, so they're actually more affordable. So the suggestion, therefore, is what's happened as a percentage change of the overall basket. So even if you're experiencing deflation, that doesn't mean the price of everything is decreasing. Right? You are still going to find increases in price of some goods and services. Even if there's inflation, you're still going to find some goods and services there where their prices are decreasing. I'm stressing this. I know it's fairly obvious to you all, I'm sure, but the reason why is because, again, in your analysis, that's the sort of understanding you need, right? Because it's a little bit of a trap for young players, that one as well. Yep. So therefore, we can't treat all goods and services in the basket equally because they represent only a small part of your individual consumption. Right? There are some products that you might buy regularly, like regular consumables, And there are other services or goods even that you might buy once a year, right? Or twice a year, or however often. Okay, so therefore, one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to do what's called weighting. Now, I know you're thinking to yourself, that's me with regards to when school ends. Weighting. Okay. Next time. I need my no button. My no button's in my classroom. I miss my classroom. Right. If the price of pens double, so pen that you write with, all right, that won't affect the price level, the overall price level, very much. Okay, the example I used to give was the price of matches. In the supermarket that I worked in, we used to sell boxes of matches. Okay, and the matches used to cost about 15 cents to buy the box. I don't know how much they cost now. I wouldn't have a clue. Right, and at one point they actually increased in price, and they increased in price to 30 cents, New Zealand, that is. Now, that's a 100% increase in price for the box of matches. But it had no change in the demand. It was just nobody cared because it was such a small part of your income. And it's the same with this. If you're not purchasing a lot of a product, if they are a very small part of your consumption, they've got a low price or you don't buy many of them, then they're not going to affect the overall price of the basket particularly much at all. However, if the price of gas, petrol, American, doubles, then it's going to have a big impact, right? Or the other one I used was the house prices, right? Then it's going to have an effect on inflation. In New Zealand, house prices is the big issue that they have because house prices in the major cities in particular just went up through the roof over years. And it was always the case where the government would have to say, well, you know, house prices, you know, if you were to exclude house prices from the CPI, would that be a more realistic picture of inflation? Well, not necessarily, because there are still people buying houses. Well, is it buying the houses or is it renting the houses? And if it's renting the houses, then it's a regular purchase. And, you know, all of those sorts of questions. One of the things that they discovered in New Zealand was part of the CPI was interest costs on loans and for mortgages. And they worked out that because your tool to decrease inflation was to use interest rates, to increase interest rates. So therefore, at the same time as you are increasing interest rates to try and discourage borrowing, you are seeing that increase in interest rates as a translating into an increase in the price of houses, which then led to an increase in inflation. So the very tool you were attempting to use to correct inflation ended up causing inflation, right? Kind of causing inflation, but being measured as inflation. So the New Zealand government ended up creating a CPI, but they ended up creating a CPI-X, so a little X next to it. And the CPI-X was excluding or removing interest rates so that they could just look at the core prices of those other goods and services that we use. So the price of flights double, it has a big impact, but some individuals don't buy a lot of flights, or I guess at the moment, right? They're very expensive, so they should represent a large part of your basket. But we don't treat them all equally. We attach, weights, right, to them. And we weight them in proportion to how much we spend on them, right? So, can we treat all goods in the basket, the CPI basket, as being equal? There you go. Can we treat all goods in the CPI basket as being equal? Yeah, that's right. That's what we end up doing. In essence, the question is asking you if you can treat them all as being equal, right? So it's asking, yes, you can, no, you can't, and why is what you're after. Well done. That's very good, Vincent. Yeah, excellent. That's good, Sharaf. Waiting on a couple more. Yeah, good. That's arguing from a different point of view, a different problem, but yes, you're absolutely right with that. Yes, well done. A couple more, have a go. Okay, just a couple more, have a go. Yeah, I can see what you're getting at, Sayun. I can. What we're after is along the lines of this. So essentially, the prices of some goods are going to have bigger impacts on the total price of the basket than changes in prices in others. So if we don't take that into account, yes, you're right, the calculated price of the basket won't be as accurate when used in models for predicting the consequences of different economic factors. Yes, so therefore weights must be used. So that's a good one. Thank you, Andrew. Different portion of people's income. I'm after. Now, Fatima wrote about different represent the general goods produced in the economy, prices of which must be measured over time to help measure inflation. However, as items tend to be updated, then there could be a change with regards to that. Yes, now you're right with that too. That's not quite about the weighting. That's about the change in, so this is what Fatima had to say. So this one is about the change in the quality or the technology perhaps involved in the goods and services, and then therefore you need to change the goods and services in the basket, perhaps entirely, right? Some things come and some things go, right? Or just the quality, make an adjustment for the weighting based on the quality of it. So yes, you can make that as an argument as well. It's a slightly different argument to the idea that they are just different in your consumption. So what you consume is different based on how much you consume of it, or how big an impact it has, or how big a proportion of your income it takes up. Right. Now, because we spend more of our income on some goods, changes in the prices of those goods are more important. Therefore, the goods have different weights. So if we have a look here, you'll see this red one here is housing. So this is for the US again, right? This is December 2010. So this 41%, right, of the CPI in the basket is weighted towards housing cost. Then if we have a look here, sometimes the colors get a bit, well, for me in particular, I don't know about you, but they can get a bit tricky. So here, 17%, the purple, is transportation. What's the green? Apparel, so that's clothing. Where they say apparel, it's clothing. That's quite a lot when you consider that, what's that? Orange, recreation is 6%, and Americans spend proportionally almost as much on clothes as they do on recreation. 7% is medical care. So the argument here is that transportation is a much bigger cost to America than medical care. It's not necessarily that it's a bigger cost, it's that it is more heavily weighted in the CPI than medical costs. I mean, just look at these. These are comparable. What is that one? Recreation and education, communication. Yeah. Now, you might find, I have always found that interesting. You yourself may not, but you might be quite surprised with regards to these weightings, and CPIs in different countries are going to have different weightings because you've got different populations. Then you've got to ask yourself the question, how do they decide the weightings? Which consumers are we using on average to decide? And also which products, because when you look at the different products, as said, there are going to be quality issues, and how often are they updated with regards to the quality? One of the big ones that we had was, this is going back a number of years, but cars, because the technology improvement in cars has been quite dramatic over time. And then you consider smartphones, they've only been around 13 years. Smartphones have only been around 13 years. So within your lifetime, smartphones weren't around, so therefore they were not even remotely included within the basket for the CPI. But nowadays, they're quite ubiquitous, they're everywhere. So you're likely to see potentially them being in the weighting, but how do you judge that, right? Who decides these sorts of things? I remember one of the funny ones was, I don't know if I've got it, there was an article and it was about, you know, the stretchy trousers that people wear? whatever they're called, the stretchy trousers people wear, those, because they became so popular, particularly in the pandemic with everybody being at home, there's such a big demand for them that they've actually added them into the CPI, right? Which I find quite interesting. I don't know if you would find that something interesting, but that interests me. Now, if we consider different countries, again, this is the comment I made before, the weighting, there was the weighting that we just did with regards to the USA, and here's one for India. Now, they're going to be fairly similar with regards to the titles. It might be difficult for you to see. This blue one here is food. There's education. There's transportation. I think that's education, clothing, household facilities, and whatever that one is, other things. All right, but that one there is food, according to this. Now, quite clearly, very different. All right, in America, housing, by far the biggest. In India, food. So, here's your question. No. Let's go back to that. Sorry, I forgot I didn't put that one in there. Stop the sharing. Jump back to the meat. All right. Yeah, I'll have to get you the slides. Here's the thing. What I'm wanting to know from you now, if I might finish this. Yes, we'll do this. This is the last thing we'll do. Why is there a difference between the weightings in America to the weightings in India? What do you think? What's the big difference? Answer into the meat. And this will be the last thing that we will do today. Good, you've got some good ideas. You've got different priorities, prices for certain items. Yes, okay, keep going. Other thoughts? Why is there a difference in the weightings? Availability, okay. Other thoughts? Culture, potentially. You might make that as an argument. Developing country, that might have some impact on it. I guess, yeah, you got to be a little bit careful with that, but you could be onto something there. Sector that the country is in, agriculture, yeah, okay, more dominant sectors. Might be cheaper in India compared to the US, maybe. Different consumer behavior and preferences, absolutely. Yeah, that's very good. And we've also got to remember it's that idea of it's about your income level and the proportion of expenditure based on your income level and the amount that you buy of it. So the suggestion there in India is that you spend more on food as a proportion of your income than they do in America. Now, you could make an argument that potentially that suggests maybe on a whole, because you've got 1.3 billion people in India, 1.2, 1.3, something along those lines. Maybe lower income levels on average. Okay, so then therefore, and because you've got 1.3 billion people, therefore it's a greater proportion on average on food. Right? You might make the assumption that housing is cheaper as well, so therefore potentially less, or I don't know, could you make the assumption more people living in each house, so therefore reduced costs? You could make that sort of a guess with regards to it. But yeah, absolutely about consumer behavior and preferences. I mean, transport, you could make an argument about. All right, education, all right. All of those things that were different, there are certainly a lot to do with consumer behavior, preferences, income levels, and the amount of that product purchased. Right, ladies and gentlemen, what we're going to do is we're going to finish up there for the day. I might be seeing a number of you again because we've got parent-teacher conference happening very soon. So I'm going to need to put my shirt and tie on. But otherwise, as we'd say in the land of my birth, hei kōne rā, have a fantastic day.